Welcome to the podcast, where today we're taking on Palworld patent infringement. Welcome to the Deep End, our captivating discussion series where we dive into the depths of the current Pokemon news and theories. And today we're going to go ahead and address the updated litigation between Nintendo and Pocket Pair. Now, to preface everything, none of us here have a background in the legal aspects, ramifications, nor in Japanese law where this is taking place. A lot of this is just our talking, speculating, and coming from our points of view, as well as the interpretations of the people we will mention in this video. One of the things I need to preface with this particular video and this particular topic is that these are just opinions. We're offering our takes as unbiased as possible. We are not siding with Pocket Pair nor with Nintendo. We are just giving our observations and potential fallout. So please, when you're watching this episode, understand that we're not picking sides. Although some of the comments may come off that way, we are still trying to be as neutral as possible when it comes to this, because again, when it comes down to the legal issues, the legal ramifications, it is as courts should interpret them and not as armchair lawyers. And first and foremost, I do want to take a moment to thank both Pokesutami and Uraiden. They have been very insightful in basically breaking this down to a more layman's terms and point of view. So thank you both for that. And a lot of the things that we're going to be discussing, especially when it comes to these types of translations, especially when it comes to Pokesutami, she's just explaining it from the majority of the Japanese opinion. These opinions are not hers, not her interpretation. It's just her interpretation of what's being spoken of. And since she is much closer to the source, her insight is very valuable because it helps give us Westerners an idea of what people are feeling over on the other side of the world. With that said, let's dive into it. So this week we got information that Nintendo has filed a lawsuit against a patent infringement against Pocket Pair. Now, this is not a copyright infringement, meaning that the PALs themselves are not the subject of this lawsuit, but the way Palworld mechanically works. A lot of the features of how you capture the PALs are very similar to the way you would normally capture Pokemon in games like Pokemon Legends Arceus. And so we're going to be taking things from this perspective and just try and break down of what's going on, explain what we're seeing, and the potential fallout.
It's no secret that Palworld shares a lot in terms of both its characters, stylization, and mechanics to the Pokemon games. The catching mechanic, for example, in Pokemon you've obviously got, the standard Pokeball and how that catching mechanic works. Palworld is undoubtedly very similar, so much so that Palworld also uses spheres to catch their creatures, the Pals. Although the Pal spheres are very much stylized versions, they do look quite different. The basic mechanics are extremely similar, and I think it's going to be very difficult to dispute that point, for example. But the way Nintendo does go about applying for certain patents is quite a strange one, because in my mind this seems very reminiscent to, and I'm not exactly sure which game it was. I know it was either Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, but Nintendo tried to patent very simple gameplay mechanics. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head. Those mechanics they wanted to patent for the Zelda game are mechanics shared by, let's just say for argument's sake, 80% of the games that are currently on the market.
A lot of people are probably trying to figure out, why would Nintendo do this? And the assumption is that they do file these patents in such a way to protect themselves from any litigation that comes from outsiders coming in trying to profit off the success of specific games, like the aforementioned Legend of Zelda or even the Pokemon series. At least that's been the interpretation of why Nintendo would patent so many mechanics. And there'll be links down below so you guys can see some of the patents that Nintendo has filed as far as game mechanics goes, including the one in question. That said, I can kind of see why they want to do this. One of the biggest lawsuits that Nintendo actually ever had was back in I think it was the 80s when Donkey Kong first made the scene. A lot of the similarities of the game mirrored the movie King Kong, and Universal Pictures sued Nintendo, but Nintendo actually won that lawsuit, and I think that might have been what propagates Nintendo today to file patents on things to prevent them from getting sued from other companies about things that they do in their video games. It's now, full disclosure, it's a bit of a stretch, but that's just my opinion on that particular subject matter.
It does really call into question what's going to happen with all of these other sort of, we won't call them Pokemon clones, because I think we're past that now, but I think if we use something similar to, for example, like the Soulsborne-like games, we could probably call these Pokemon-like games, but paints them in a bit of a better light. Now look, don't get me wrong, if they like direct one-to-one rip-offs and it's just some random person in his mom's basement who wants to just profit off Pokemon, as opposed to like these dedicated teams of game developers to develop these monster catching / monster taming games. And it does call into question what they're going to do with these other games. Like Koromon was a big success. Cassette Beast, all these indie monster taming games. What is actually stopping Nintendo and the Pokemon Company from going after them?
I think that's the big 40,000 foot view when it comes to this particular topic, considering the fact that, again, the actual reasons why we don't know, we're not privy to them, is just all speculation. But outsider looking in, it definitely looks like Nintendo's just trying to make a move on Pocket Pair because of the success of the game, as well as a lot of the character designs, but they couldn't get them on character designs, so they found a way around that particular notion by utilizing the patents that they have for the catching mechanics of Pokemon. Now, the original patent was back in 2022, and it was just recently refreshed this year. It was as recent as August, if I recall correctly. And so, the 40,000, the 30,000 foot view is Nintendo refreshed the wording so that they can go ahead and go after Pocket Pair because they couldn't get them for character infringement. And so, optics wise, it doesn't look good for Nintendo, even though they are within it does look like they're legally within their rights. And Pokemon Legends Arceus, I believe, was announced a few months prior to Palworld, and in the trailer for Pokemon Legends Arceus, they did show off the catching mechanic, whereas Palworld did not.
The way I see it is, he said, she said. So although Palworld might not have shown it off, you can't really create like these monster collecting games and not already have your catching mechanic established. So maybe that was Palworld playing a bit conservatively and with their trailers, just because they didn't want those trailers taken down by Nintendo or the Pokemon Company, because that would hurt their marketing a lot.
Now, one of the other things that I do have to point out is that the other reason why, now, full disclosure, I am a shareholder in Nintendo. However, I am approaching this from as a stockholder, but I'm also looking at this from a gamer perspective. Pokemon Company are only available on Nintendo systems. You cannot find a Pokemon game on anything other than Nintendo system. And just in reverse, Palworld's available on other platforms, but it's not available on Switch. It's not available on any Nintendo system. So as far as direct competition, I don't really see it, especially with the fact that Nintendo is not putting out a Pokemon game this year. I don't see how they were damaged by this from a stockholder and a gamer perspective. And I think this may be a waste of time and a waste of money on Nintendo for doing this. I can, as an artist, understand why they would want to take on Pocket Pair, especially with a lot of the likenesses of the pals to Pokemon. It is what it is when it comes to that particular aspect. However, the way they're going around it does seem a little scummy to me, because they couldn't get them one way, they have to go get them another way. Me personally, I would have tried to reach out to Pocket Pair and say, hey, look guys, we got to have a conversation before we take this to court. Let's get the lawyers involved. Let's sit, let's talk, let's work out a deal. because when you boil things down to the basics, Palworld does not play like a Pokemon game, and Pokemon does not play like a Palworld game. Remove the guns, remove the capture aspects of it. There's a lot of other things that Palworld brings to the table that Pokemon does not. And there are things in Pokemon that Palworld doesn't do. So the similarities end after the catching mechanics and after just the pals themselves. The two games branch off very differently. And so as a stockholder, as a gamer, I don't see the need for going through all this personally. But, you know, as a company, I can see why Nintendo would feel the need to do this.
It also brings into question, was this lawsuit pushed mainly by Nintendo or by the Pokemon Company? Because, you know, when Palworld first came out, I think within the first week, the Pokemon Company, I think it was, they put it out on their Twitter. And it was pretty much just a nice way of saying, we've got 1 million emails from you guys. We've looked at the game. It doesn't seem like our copyright has been infringed upon, so please stop emailing us. But I do really want to know which side of the table this lawsuit came from. But again, that was specifically copyrighted material. It wasn't at all about the patent. So maybe after sending that message out, they've been sort of collecting data and doing all of that stuff that goes into these, I don't know, when you call it a domestic legal case, because it is Japan versus Japan instead of like Microsoft versus Nintendo.
Well, according to, I believe, Sutami, she had mentioned that as far as trademark laws go, Japan works very similar to how US trademark laws work. So I'm not entirely 100% sure that they couldn't have gone the trademark route. I don't know if Japan has similar parity laws to the US, but if they do, that would probably be why they couldn't get away with going after for copyright, since one could say that this is just a straight up parody of Pokemon, but done in such a way that it's, you know, they can skirt around it. And again, it's just her interpretation of when it comes to the Japanese sentiments, of what she's been seeing. Like when it comes to the copyright aspects, you have to understand that the game was announced back in 2021, and they did not hide certain pals from screen that look very similar to Pokemon. If they were going to go after the copyright issue, it should have been starting back then, but that didn't happen, which is why I think Nintendo wasn't even going to bother with them until it blew up as it did. Again, speculation, so I just want to make sure that that's stressed, that this is all speculation. PLA was revealed first, which is the big thing, hence why the patent lawsuit looks like it might actually have some merit.
That also brings up the issue that even if it was negligible at best, unless it's a case that gets thrown out, you've got these two big powerhouse companies. I mean, Nintendo dominates the handheld market, and Pokemon is the highest grossing multimedia franchise in the world, and they've decided to go after a relatively small indie developer, and they can drag this out for as long as they want to because they do have the money, and they're gonna sort of force Pocket Pair into settling because, you know, money runs out, money is finite. And I mean, recently there was a mobile game that did heavily infringe upon Pokemon's intellectual property. Well, I don't know if it was just intellectual property or characters as well. And we did speak about this a bit offline, but they dragged it out for 5 years. The game developers only settled, I think it was either this past week or the week before. Regardless of whether COVID slowed it down or not, the Pokemon Company and Nintendo could have dragged that out for the same amount of time, whether COVID was a thing or not, or even longer, because they have the money to do it. And, you know, you force someone into a settlement, you essentially force them to pay you what's just like a big boy fine and cease development on this game and delete the assets.
Looking at the patent, Uraiden had taken a look at both the 2002 and the 2022 and the 2024 patents, and to try and interpret what the differences were. And she came down to saying that the original patent describes two modes. First mode is throwing an item that affects a field character. The second mode is throwing out a fighting character to fight a field character. The 2004 patent describes the two modes specifically as throwing a catching item and throwing a fighting character, which seems to eliminate other field items such as throwing out food or items to stun. And the absence of other field items is the biggest change between the 2022 and the 2024 throwing mechanic patents, although 2024 makes specific mention of health being a factor in capturing success rate, which wasn't mentioned in the 2022 patent. That's kind of how Nintendo has been getting their way into taking this into a lawsuit. Because of the patent refresh, they could change the wording and then apply it retroactively. But again, that leads to a very slippery slope, which is something I caution everybody who's picking sides. Does Nintendo have the right to sue? According to the patents, yeah, they might have some merit. However, take into account that what happens in this case could be used down the line for other things if Nintendo decides to push it. And if Japanese courts are similar in respects to US courts, this is a step that can lead further down to more lawsuits, more litigations, and only is in the long term is going to cause problems for other creating companies. And that's something that I kind of want everyone to make sure that they keep in the back of their mind. Yes, this is happening. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? And what is the fallout of this case moving forward?
And what you just mentioned, I actually think, and again, this is my personal opinion, I have no legal background. Before today, I thought courts were just places where you play tennis or basketball. Just clarification. But it's interesting because it specifically mentions throwing out a creature, we'll say an entity, because as we know, Palworld needs to attack the NPCs that are found in the ridges as well, and that's a whole different topic that we probably won't talk about. The battling system is completely different. So yes, weakening a creature and catching it is a staple of these monster collecting games. But in terms of the pattern, I actually think that Nintendo and the Pokémon Company are sort of dancing on a very thin line in terms of it, because it seems that the basis for it is very loose. There's not actually much substance to it, and I think there is potential for Pocket Pair to walk out of this scot-free, just based on hearing what you just said about the patents. Nintendo and the Pokémon Company are going to have some extremely good lawyers, and I think they're gonna put up a fight and try and squeeze as much out of Pocket Pair as they can.
I think my biggest concern here is, should Nintendo and Game Freak win against Pocket Pair, what's to stop them from, with these new patents, what's to stop them from going up against Monster Hunter? Is it Monster Hunter? I honestly haven't played, but like games such as Digimon or Cassette, like you said before, Cassette Beast. Temtem. I mean, I know Temtem said that they had permission from Game Freak to produce the game, but that doesn't mean that they can't just decide, you can't have this game anymore, and now we're just going to go ahead and sue you for having this game. Like, that there's a lot of precedent that this court case can play when it comes to the monster catching taming genre that, has become very popular recently, especially the fact that Pokemon is the biggest franchise that does this. Digimon's following second, but they play very differently, but there's a lot of elements that are similar. So again, should Nintendo win this, that basically just sets them up to go after every other game that is out there, should they choose to. Whether or not is a different story, but it gives them a foothold to do so.
I think that in and of itself is also a very slippery slope, because I think that could then fall under the category of patent abuse. I don't think they're going to want to go after all these other indie developers and, try and nail them for the tiniest things, because that's going to land Nintendo and the Pokemon Company in very hot water. But also, you can't forget that Pokemon was based on your sort of much older monster collecting games. I mean, think like Monster Sanctuary.
But Shin Megami Tensei was I believe the first. And there was the Ultraman capsule. Because we had discussed this back in February when Nintendo first chirped up about Palworld, and now we're starting to see gears turning. But where we saw things in February, they totally went in a different direction today.
Just building on that, for a lot of us, I think it's more so to do with the older Pokemon players. Like, you can finish the games very quickly and do whatever you want. And if you're not into competitive, but you really like Monster Tamer games, you sort of look for that next experience. Where the Pokemon is locked to the Switch, you'll then go, I don't know if there's many on PlayStation, but you'll either go Xbox or PC for that. And I think locking these kind of games to Nintendo's has a lot of potential to sort of hurt the fan base, because it's not like these games are exactly revolutionary and they, cutting edge ideas. A lot of them are very transparent and say, listen, we're big fans of Pokemon, and we took inspiration from our favorite game franchise to then build up our own. And I know specifically for me as an older Pokemon fan, I really enjoy them, and I enjoy, going and trying these games out. I'm not going to like all of them, but there might be a few that I really gel with. Palworld being a great example of that. And again, for myself personally, that, I know it's a weird thing to say, but it fuels my love for Pokemon even more, because I can see that there's a lot of love for the franchise in the community, so much so that people are making games inspired by them.
I have to agree. Like, I played Palworld, and to be fair, I pick up Pokemon just for, like, say, the events at this point. I haven't actually finished the last 3 Pokemon games. There's stuff I still have to do, like catch certain Pokemon that are only available in the last 3 games. Yeah, I know I'm a bad Pokemon player for that. But at the same time, I've always been a fan of the resource management type of games, and Palworld kind of added that to my gameplay. So I get a little bit of Pokemon, I get a little bit of resource management, and I spent some time playing the game. I've got my bases, I've plowed through most of the stuff, but just like Pokemon, Palworld got some updates. I haven't played those updates yet. I haven't caught the new pals yet. But every time I do, I always think back, like you said, to Pokemon because of how interesting it is. It's very reminiscent, and it always keeps me coming back to the next Pokemon game, waiting with anticipation, because I want to see what Game Freak brings to the table next. And I'm of the opinion that competition breeds innovation. So Palworld dropped bases where your pals can help you do things. Specifically, you can build a farm if you wanted to do that, and have your water pals, your grass pals all help you farm. That's not something that Pokemon has ever done. It's been 30 years. Other games have done it. Why hasn't Pokemon? But it also gives me connection to those pals that I don't have when it comes to Pokemon.
Specifically, I think for me, it takes my 2 favorite game franchises, I would say, although Arc isn't really a franchise, but it takes my 2 favorite games and puts them together, which are the Pokemon games and Arc. And Legends had a bit of the resource management stuff in it, but not to the extent that I would say I crave from like a survival game, which, I mean, Palworld is pretty much a survival game. So if anything were to happen to Palworld, let's say Nintendo and the Pokemon Company win and Palworld has to shut down and delete the game, I'd actually be very sad, because, I've completed the game. I go back to it every now and then, build my base up a bit more, breed, do whatever, just have fun with it, because it is a great game to sort of de-stress and unwind playing. I think it might also be a nice thing to touch on the butterfly effect that Pokemon has had, because it's no secret that without Pokemon, we probably wouldn't be a thing. We probably would have never met. Palworld wouldn't be a thing. So there's no way we could have met through that, although something similar might have come up, but there's no guarantee. And I wish developers took this more into account, as, the connections that their games have made. Although there is a lot of toxicity within the Pokemon community specifically, over the last couple of years, that toxicity has sort of died down a lot, and it's become a much friendlier place. And it's now just a really good time, because there's less naysayers around it. It fosters more love for the franchise.
I think it's come down to the fact that a lot of people have just decided that they're not looking to foster that kind of atmosphere. So as soon as it rears its ugly head, people are just like, out. As Pokemon enthusiasts, we need to do a wait and see. Whether you agree with Nintendo or don't, whether you agree with what Pocket Pair did or don't. I mean, these are all, when it comes down to it, our opinions. We aren't in the court systems. We don't understand the courts the system that they're using over there. I mean, unless you're a Japanese lawyer, they have their fingers so close to the pulse on this that they can give us a blow by blow. Which, if you're a Japanese lawyer that is close enough to this to give us a blow by blow, please contact me. I'd love to be in on to understand how this is all working out. I think we really just need to take a step back. I think we need to let things play out before we make any kind of judgments, whether you agree with what Nintendo is doing or not. Be sure to share, like, subscribe. Let us know how we're doing down below. And as always, have a wonderful day. Bye.
Yes.